Welcome to Nightmare Lullabies. Here, we bring you chilling tales to keep you on edge while helping you unwind. If you enjoy our stories, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Got a creepy story of your own? Share it in the comments below. We might feature it in a future video. Now sit back, relax, and let the story begin. It was April 8, 1969, a quiet Tuesday in the Norfolk countryside, the kind of spring day that felt peaceful and uneventful. The air was crisp but mild, carrying the earthy scent of damp soil and freshly cut grass. Trees were beginning to bloom, casting dappled shadows on the narrow country lanes, and in the distance, the occasional chirping of birds blended with the faint hum of farm machinery. Life in Norfolk moved at a slow, predictable pace, especially in the small village of Metton, where everyone knew each other, and strangers stood out immediately. 13-year-old April Fabb was one of those children who never caused trouble. She was a quiet, kind girl, known in the village for her shy smile and gentle nature. She had bright eyes that always seemed full of curiosity, and she carried herself with the grace of someone much older. She wasn't the type to sneak out or play pranks. She was dependable, the kind of daughter any parent would be proud of. That afternoon, she had a simple errand to run. She was going to visit her older sister, who lived in Roughton, a small village just a couple of miles away. It was a journey she had made before, one that should have taken her no more than 20 minutes by bicycle. There was no reason to think anything unusual would happen. April left her home at around 1:40 p.m., setting off on her blue and white bicycle. She carried a small packet of cigarettes with her, a gift for her brother-in-law, something she had been asked to bring along. At 13, she wasn't old enough to smoke, of course, but in the late 1960s, it wasn't unusual for children to run small errands like that. She pedaled along the quiet country roads, her bike tires crunching lightly against the gravel as she passed open fields and the occasional farmhouse. A few villagers saw her ride by, farmers tending to their crops, an elderly couple out for a walk, but no one noticed anything strange. She wasn't in a hurry. She didn't seem distressed or afraid. She was just another child on a bicycle, making her way through the peaceful countryside. Then, at 2:06 p.m., something unexplainable happened. April's bicycle was found abandoned in a field along a dirt path near Metton. The bike lay neatly on its side. The front was still gently spinning when it was first discovered. There was no sign of a struggle. No overturned grass, no scattered belongings, no obvious indication that anything violent had taken place. But April was gone. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. Metton was a peaceful, rural village where life felt almost frozen in time, untouched by the hustle and bustle of the larger cities. The roads were narrow and winding, flanked by fields that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Thick hedgerows and scattered oak trees lined the landscape, their branches swaying gently in the spring breeze. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, where neighbors stopped to chat on their way to the village store, and where children played freely in the meadows without a second thought for their safety. Life in Metton moved at a slower, more predictable pace. Families had lived there for generations, their roots embedded in the land just as deeply as the towering trees. Doors were rarely locked, and children were trusted to explore as long as they were home in time for supper. Strangers were uncommon, and when someone new did pass through, they were noticed immediately. In this tight-knit community, the idea that one of their own could simply disappear seemed unfathomable. April Fabb was a bright, well-behaved girl who fit right into this world of quiet routine and familiarity. She was known for her soft-spoken nature, her polite demeanor, and her love of animals. She had a gentle way with them, often stopping to pet a cat on her way home from school or watching the horses in the nearby fields. Her teachers spoke highly of her, describing her as a hard-working student with a creative spirit. Drawing was one of her favorite pastimes. She could often be found with a sketch pad in her lap, carefully tracing the outlines of birds, flowers, or whatever else caught her eye. Unlike some children her age, April wasn't a risk-taker. She wasn't known to wander off or act recklessly. She followed the rules, respected her parents, and stuck close to the small circle of friends she had made at school. On weekends, she helped her mother with household chores, tidying up or running small errands, and she loved visiting her older sister, with whom she shared a close bond. That Tuesday, April had been in good spirits. The ride to her sister's house was a short and familiar one, winding through the countryside she had always known. It was a trip she had made before, one she could do without thinking. There was no reason for her to feel uneasy, no sense of foreboding. As she pedaled away from home, she had no idea that this would be her last known journey. No idea that within minutes she would vanish without a trace, leaving behind only questions that, even decades later, would remain unanswered. Panic set in quickly. When April failed to arrive at her sister's house, her family initially assumed she had been delayed. Perhaps she had stopped to chat with a friend or taken a longer route. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, unease began to creep in. Her sister made a few calls, first to their mother, then to neighbors who might have seen her along the way. No one had. April's absence was beginning to feel unnatural, and a deep sense of dread settled over the family. By late afternoon, her father and a few locals set out to retrace her route, calling her name as they walked along the quiet country lanes. Then they found the bicycle. Lying neatly on its side in a field, the blue and white bike was eerily undisturbed, as if it had been placed there rather than fallen. There were no skid marks, no signs of a struggle. The packet of cigarettes she had been carrying for her brother-in-law was missing, but nothing else seemed amiss. There was no immediate indication of what had happened or where April had gone. Within hours, the authorities were called, and the police response was swift. Officers from across Norfolk were mobilized, and what followed was one of the most extensive searches in the county's history. News of April's disappearance spread rapidly, and soon, more than 1,500 volunteers had gathered to help. Farmers and villagers combed through fields, checked ditches, and searched abandoned barns. Helicopters buzzed overhead, scanning the landscape for any sign of movement. Search teams worked tirelessly, covering miles of terrain. They searched the hedgerows, crawled through dense woodland, and waded into streams, hoping against hope that they would find a clue. Anything that could point to where April had gone. Tracker dogs were brought in, but the scent trail ended abruptly near where her bicycle had been found. It was as if she had simply ceased to exist. At first, investigators considered the possibility of an accident. Could she have fallen into a hidden ditch or wandered into a wooded area and lost her way? But that theory was quickly dismissed. The land had been thoroughly searched. If April was nearby, they would have found her. As the hours turned into days, fear tightened its grip on the community. People locked their doors for the first time in years. Parents kept their children close, warning them not to stray too far. Suspicion and speculation spread like wildfire. Witness statements placed April on her bicycle just minutes before her bike was found. She had been seen pedaling along the country lane, her figure small against the wide Norfolk landscape. But no one had seen her being taken. No one had heard a cry for help. There was no struggle, no clear evidence of a crime. One moment she was there. The next she was gone. Several witnesses reported seeing April that day, each sighting placing her on the road just minutes before she vanished. A local farmer, tending to his fields, saw her cycling past, her small frame balanced effortlessly on the blue and white bicycle. She had waved at him in passing, a friendly, familiar gesture in a village where everyone knew each other. Nothing seemed out of place. She was alone, moving at a steady pace toward her sister's home. Another villager recalled spotting her about a mile from where her bike was later found. She had been riding as usual, showing no signs of distress or hesitation. There was no indication that she had sensed any danger, no lingering glances over her shoulder, no hurried pedaling. Yet despite multiple people seeing her along the way, not a single person saw her being approached by a stranger. No one witnessed a vehicle slowing down beside her, no sound of a struggle, no sudden commotion. It was as if she had simply vanished between one glance and the next. The discovery of her bicycle only deepened the mystery. Investigators had expected to find it discarded hastily, thrown aside in panic or struggle. Instead, it was positioned with almost deliberate care, lying neatly on its side in the open field, undamaged, as though it had been gently placed there rather than abandoned in haste. This detail was unsettling. If April had simply fallen or been forced off her bike, it would likely have been toppled awkwardly, the handlebars twisted, the wheels still spinning. Instead, its careful placement suggested one of two possibilities. Either April had stopped voluntarily, perhaps meeting someone she knew, or the person responsible for her disappearance had been meticulous, ensuring that nothing looked out of the ordinary. For investigators, this was a crucial clue. If she had been taken by force, why was there no sign of struggle? If she had left willingly, where had she gone? And why had she never been seen again? Rumors spread throughout the community. Could it have been someone she knew? Had a stranger lured her away? The countryside was remote, with long stretches of empty road and dense woodland. If someone had been waiting, watching, planning, this would have been the perfect place to take a child without anyone noticing. The more people talked, the more one particular theory started to take shape. Could it have been someone who had been waiting for the perfect moment? The rural landscape, with its isolated roads and thick trees, seemed to conceal more than just the secrets of the small towns. It could easily hide a predator who had been observing the area for weeks or even months, carefully selecting their victim. April Fabb, a young girl known for her independent spirit, had been walking alone that day. Her route took her along quiet roads, far from the watchful eyes of the community. No one had been there to see her, and it was almost as if the moment she left the safety of her home, she vanished into thin air. Was it a random act, or had someone been waiting for her, knowing she would pass by at that exact moment? The idea that someone might have been waiting in the shadows began to resonate more strongly as investigators considered the geography of the area. The dense woods could easily provide cover, and the remote location meant that even if someone were to act quickly, there was little chance of being spotted by a passerby. Could it have been someone familiar with the area? Someone who knew where to hide, where to wait? It wasn't just the geography that raised suspicions, it was the timing. The absence of any witnesses suggested that whoever was responsible had planned it well. The decision to act when April was alone, when there were no other people around to hear her calls or see the struggle, suggested that this was not a crime of impulse, but one of opportunity. Whoever had done this knew exactly when and where to strike. The more investigators dug into this possibility, the clearer it became that this was no accident. Someone had been prepared. Someone had been watching, waiting for that moment when April would be vulnerable. But as the investigation continued, the chilling reality set in. If someone had been waiting for her, it would mean that the person who took April had been planning this for longer than anyone could imagine. And the more time passed, the more difficult it became to find any evidence of their presence. No footprints, no strange tire tracks, just the silence of the countryside that had swallowed her whole. One of the prevailing theories was that April was taken by a passing driver. The quiet country lanes would have made it easy for a vehicle to slow down and snatch her without anyone noticing. The roads were long and winding, with little to no traffic on most days. If a car had approached her, it could have stopped just long enough to abduct her, before quickly driving away, disappearing into the remote countryside. With so few people on the roads, there was little chance of a witness seeing anything unusual. In a small rural community like Walpole St. Andrew, it wasn't uncommon for vehicles to pass through the area unnoticed, especially if they were traveling on less frequented routes. April, being young and alone, might not have hesitated to approach a car if the driver offered help, or if she simply thought they were someone she knew. It was a scenario that many considered plausible. The idea of a passing car slowing down, offering a ride, and then taking her without any resistance. However, there was one problem: no reports of unusual cars came in. Despite extensive searches and appeals from the police for any witnesses who may have seen a suspicious vehicle that afternoon, no one could provide a clear lead. The lack of any corroborating sightings made it difficult to confirm this theory. No one could say they had seen a car lingering on the roads around the time April disappeared, and there were no descriptions of any strange or unfamiliar vehicles in the area. The absence of these reports left investigators frustrated. How could such an event have occurred without anyone noticing a strange car? Could the perpetrator have been someone who blended in with the usual traffic, perhaps driving an ordinary vehicle that didn't raise any suspicion? Or was the lack of evidence simply a result of the rural isolation, where a car could have driven past and vanished from sight without leaving a trace? As the investigation continued, the possibility that a passing driver had been involved remained one of the strongest theories, despite the lack of hard evidence. The idea that a person could have snatched April without a single person noticing was chilling, but it also raised more questions than it answered. If a car had been involved, why had no one seen anything? Was it simply bad luck that no one was in the right place at the right time to observe something that could have solved the case? Investigators considered the possibility that April had willingly gone with someone she trusted. A neighbor? A family acquaintance? It was a theory that raised even more unsettling questions. April had been known to be independent, and in the small, tight-knit community where she lived, it was not unusual for children to interact freely with familiar faces, whether it was a neighbor offering a ride or a family friend stopping to chat. She might have felt completely safe with someone she recognized, someone she believed had no ill intentions. The idea that April could have gone with someone she trusted was difficult to accept, but it made sense when investigators considered her age and the relationships she had with those around her. Perhaps she had been approached by someone who knew her well, someone who seemed harmless in her eyes. It could have been a neighbor, someone who was part of her daily life, or even a family acquaintance, someone who had gained her trust over time. But the more investigators looked into this possibility, the more complicated it became. There were no known threats in the area, no signs that anyone in her immediate circle had acted suspiciously. April's family reported no history of issues with neighbors or acquaintances, and no one had indicated any previous tension or cause for concern. However, this didn't rule out the possibility that someone she felt safe with had betrayed that trust, luring her into a situation she could never have anticipated. If April had willingly gone with someone, it would have meant that her disappearance was not the result of a random act of violence, but rather something more personal, something that might have been carefully planned. Could someone have manipulated her into leaving with them, under the guise of offering help or something familiar? Could they have used their relationship with her as a way to lower her guard, making her think it was safe to go with them? This theory was particularly troubling because it suggested that the perpetrator might have known exactly how to approach April. They would have understood her routine, her behavior, and how to gain her confidence, things that made her more vulnerable than anyone realized. And if someone she knew was involved, it would mean that the town itself held a dark secret, one that had been hiding in plain sight all along. The investigation into this possibility added another layer of complexity to an already puzzling case. How do you investigate someone who seems completely trustworthy? Someone whose connection to the victim makes it hard to imagine they could be involved in something so terrible. And yet, the chilling thought lingered. What if April's disappearance wasn't the work of a stranger, but the result of someone she had trusted all along? In later years, detectives examined links to other cases, including the disappearance of Jeanette Tate in 1978. The similarities between the two cases were striking. Both young girls, both vanishing without a trace in rural areas, and both disappearing during times when the countryside seemed peaceful and quiet. The disappearances had a haunting resemblance: isolated locations, lack of witnesses, and no solid leads. The possibility that the two cases were connected couldn't be ignored. As detectives delved deeper into the investigation, they began to consider the theory that a serial offender could have been operating in rural England at the time, targeting young girls in isolated areas like those around Walpole St. Andrew and the surrounding countryside. The idea of a serial offender struck fear into the hearts of the local communities. It was a chilling thought that a predator had been moving through these quiet towns, selecting vulnerable children from remote, rural locations. If there was a pattern, it would mean that these abductions weren't just random acts of violence, but part of a larger, more methodical plan. Detectives began to examine the possibility that someone had been systematically targeting young girls who lived on the outskirts of small villages, where the roads were long and empty and the population sparse. Jeanette Tate's case, which occurred nearly a decade after April's disappearance, seemed eerily similar. Jeanette, just 13 years old, had vanished from a remote location in Devon while riding her bicycle, also in broad daylight. The manner of her disappearance, like April's, had left little evidence and no witnesses. There was also the fact that both girls were relatively familiar with their surroundings and had lived in quiet, rural communities. Could the same person have been responsible for both cases? Was April's disappearance part of a larger, unrecognized pattern of crime in rural England? However, despite this growing speculation, no direct connection was ever established. Investigators worked tirelessly to compare the two cases, looking for any forensic evidence, witness statements, or even subtle clues that might link the two. But as time passed, the lack of physical evidence and the absence of any clear suspects meant that the theory remained just that, a theory. There was no definitive proof to suggest that the two disappearances were linked, and no further cases of abductions like these emerged in the same pattern. While the possibility of a serial offender was considered seriously, it ultimately did not lead to any breakthroughs in April's case. The connection remained speculative, leaving more questions than answers. Could the disappearances of these young girls have been the work of the same person, or were they tragic, unrelated events? The idea of a serial offender operating in rural England remained a chilling thought, but without clear evidence, it could never be confirmed. April's family was devastated. Her parents, along with her siblings, clung to hope during those early days, hoping that somehow April would return, safe and sound. But as the hours turned into days and the days into weeks, that hope began to slowly fade. They couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened, but they held on to the belief that perhaps, just perhaps, there was still a chance of finding her alive. The search for April continued, with every resource available being used to comb through the countryside and talk to anyone who might have seen something. But with each passing day, the fear of the worst grew stronger. Weeks turned into months, and the case grew colder. Despite all the efforts of the police, the lack of solid leads or any promising breakthroughs meant that the investigation could only go so far. Investigators followed every lead they could, but as time wore on, the trail became more and more difficult to follow. Each passing day without a new clue or piece of evidence made it harder for anyone to believe that April would be found. But still, her family refused to give up hope entirely. The case remained open, but it was clear that the likelihood of solving it diminished with every passing month. Forensic science at the time was limited, and without the advanced technology that exists today, investigators were left without the tools that might have helped them solve the case more quickly. There were no CCTV cameras to review, no mobile phone records to trace, and no DNA databases to consult. The technology that could have potentially led to a breakthrough was either non-existent or in its infancy. In the absence of modern tools, investigators relied heavily on witness testimony, physical searches, and the traditional methods of police work. But as the investigation wore on, those methods became less effective. The lack of any definitive evidence, no sign of April, no trace of the suspect, meant that the case grew cold faster than anyone had hoped. Had this case happened today, there might have been a much stronger chance of finding answers. With modern technology, the investigation could have taken a completely different turn. CCTV footage from nearby roads or towns might have shown something important. Mobile phone records could have been used to trace April's movements or to uncover contact with a potential abductor. DNA evidence could have been collected from any number of possible locations, offering vital clues to the person responsible. The resources available to investigators today could have helped piece together the mystery much sooner. But in 1969, those tools didn't exist. The investigators, despite their best efforts, were operating in an era where many of the techniques that are now commonplace in criminal investigations were still years away from being developed. The absence of modern technology left April's family and the entire community to grapple with the harsh reality that without new evidence, the case might remain unsolved. Despite their relentless hope and determination, the passage of time made the possibility of finding answers seem increasingly unlikely. In 2019, 50 years after April vanished, Norfolk police issued a renewed appeal for information. The anniversary of her disappearance marked a poignant moment for her family and the community, but it also brought a renewed sense of urgency. The passage of time had not diminished the need for answers. If anything, it had only made the mystery more haunting. With new developments in forensic technology, there was a glimmer of hope that the case could be solved, even after 5 decades. Advances in technology meant that previously overlooked evidence, perhaps hidden in files or stored away in evidence lockers, could now be re-examined with fresh eyes. Detectives hoped that the new tools available might reveal something that had been missed in the original investigation. Forensic genealogy, a groundbreaking advancement that had been instrumental in solving cold cases like that of the Golden State Killer, offered a promising new avenue for investigation. By using DNA samples to trace distant relatives and build family trees, this technology had helped authorities solve crimes that had remained unsolved for years. The possibility that this technique could be applied to April's case gave investigators new hope. Could a tiny piece of evidence, perhaps a scrap of clothing or an unnoticed trace of DNA, preserved from the original investigation, one day reveal the truth? Could this new scientific approach uncover a lead that would finally break the case wide open? Despite the optimism that came with these advancements, the renewed appeal did not immediately lead to any major breakthroughs. As of today, no one has been charged, no body has been found, and April Fabb remains missing. The community still holds out hope, but the mystery persists unresolved. The pain of April's disappearance has lingered in Norfolk for over 50 years, but the potential for answers now feels more tangible than ever. Detectives continue to revisit old evidence, re-interview witnesses, and analyze any new information that comes in. But as of yet, there has been no significant movement forward. As time marches on, and more cases benefit from modern forensic technology, there remains the question: will April's case be one of those that is finally solved? Could a new piece of evidence, or perhaps a fresh perspective, shed light on the truth of what happened to this young girl all those years ago? For her family, the unanswered questions are unbearable. Did she suffer? The pain of not knowing the truth is something that April's family has lived with for decades. The memories of their daughter, of her laughter and her light, have been overshadowed by the questions that will never go away. Did she suffer in her final moments? Was she frightened or in pain? These thoughts haunt them, as they've never had the answers they so desperately need. The not knowing gnaws at their hearts, an ever-present ache that time has done little to dull. Was she taken far away? The uncertainty of where April might have ended up is another painful thought that lingers. Did the person responsible drive her somewhere far from Norfolk, far from her home? Or did something happen to her closer to where she was last seen? The lack of physical evidence, the absence of any sign of her, has left her family trapped in a nightmare where no resolution is within reach. They hold on to the hope that, somewhere out there, a clue might exist that could bring them closer to finding her, or at least understanding what happened. Is there someone still alive today who knows what happened but has never spoken out? This question is perhaps the most haunting. Could there be someone who holds the key to unlocking the mystery, but has never come forward? Someone who knows exactly what happened to April that day, but has remained silent all these years? The thought that the truth might be within reach, if only someone would speak up, is almost too much to bear. The years have gone by, but the possibility that someone, perhaps even someone close to the case, knows something remains a constant, nagging worry. April Fabb's disappearance is a chilling reminder that some mysteries remain unsolved, lingering like shadows on quiet country roads. It serves as a testament to how elusive the truth can be, even in an era where technology has drastically changed the way investigations are conducted. Despite all the advancements, there are cases like April's that remain frozen in time, unanswered, unexplained, and unresolved. In a world filled with technology and forensic advancements, her case stands as an unsettling reminder that not all stories have a clear ending. A 13-year-old girl, a bicycle, and a journey that never reached its end. The silence that surrounds her disappearance still echoes loudly today. A story left untold, and a life left unfinished. If you or anyone you know has information about the disappearance of April Fabb, please contact the authorities. Even the smallest detail could be the key to finally uncovering the truth. It is never too late to speak up, and the smallest piece of information might be what finally brings closure to a family that has suffered in silence for far too long.